I just wish that pattern designers were a little more consistent. If you're interested in making any of the patterns that I've featured in the beginning of this video, please keep watching because I will share with you my thoughts, my criticisms, any tips that I might have, my experience, and errors that I might have found from each of the patterns. And I get pretty detailed in my criticism, so let's get started. My first finished project comes from this book, and it is written and designed by Schenkel, and it is Animal Friends of Pica 2. I believe at the moment she has a total of 3 books published already, and they're all available on Amazon. The pattern that I chose comes from the second book, and the pattern that I chose is Satsuki Cat. What I love about working patterns from Schenkel's books is that she provides so many options for color work. I'm always learning new stitches, new color work, and it's just so fun, which I think is great for intermediate to advanced amigurumists. The pattern is written in US terminology, which is great because that is my preference. In the front of the book, she does provide a reading a pattern section where she does translate from US to UK or from UK to US. And what I find interesting is that she has terminology in Latin American and Spanish languages, which I don't think I've ever found in any other pattern book, which is great because I've seen patterns with these terminology and I'm like, I have no idea what that means. So if I get those patterns again, I know exactly what book to look through and figure out the translation. So that's a great tip to know. I love that Schenkel provides a visual index of all of her patterns in the book, but one thing that I would love to see in addition to the pictures, or 2 things that I would prefer to see along with the pictures, is the name of the character as well as the page number so that I can easily just jump straight to the page and get started. But if you do want to reference a pattern quickly, you can reference the written index in the front of the book. Now the pattern that I chose, Satsuki Cat, is rated 2 stars, and all the patterns in this book is rated between 1 and 3 stars, but nowhere in this book could I find what the rankings mean. Sometimes in some pattern books they'll tell you if 1 means beginner, 2nd means intermediate, and 3 means advanced, but I don't think it would be a fair assumption. I would like to see what it actually means, but instead she does provide a list of skills needed, which I thought as a maker was unique and even more helpful for makers to decide whether or not that pattern is for you, because it actually specifies each skill for each pattern. And not only that, she references pages in the book where you can go back and read her detailed written instructions on how to work that technique or that skill, along with beautifully clear photos. Now let's get into the actual doll that I made. So here is my Satsuki Cat, and I really love this pattern. Now this is a bow, and has you sew it onto a strap of her dress, but I prefer to have it removable. So what I did was I attached it to an alligator clip, which you can easily find at like Hobby Lobby or your local craft store, or even online at Amazon.com. But what I like about doing this is that I can have it removable, and I really like that option whenever I deal with clothing for any of my animals or dolls for that matter. The dress is also removable, which I love. I love it when clothing for the amigurumi patterns are removable because then it gives that interactive feel with the doll, so you can play dress up as opposed to just having a doll with fixed clothing. The shirt is not removable. It's actually part of her body, but the dress is removable, which you can just simply tie on and off and play dress up. So if you wanted to, you could make different variations of the dress with different colors, different patterns, with maybe some striping or variegated yarn. You could even, if you're intermediate or an advanced amigurumist, you could even design your own pattern for a dress and put that on your doll. For her body, I did use a variegated yarn, and I really love how it gave kind of a stripy look. So that is a great way to add a stripish look without all the work involved with doing those color changes for striping. And I really love that it came out that way. I wasn't expecting it. This bow does require a special stitch, but don't worry, if there are any special stitches that you are not aware of or familiar with, you can always reference the beginning of her book where she has explanations for all of her special stitches. But if you're a visual learner like I am, you can always look up tutorials on YouTube relating to anything basically, not just amigurumi. I think it's worth mentioning that Schenkel does write her patterns from a top-down style. So if you're only familiar with working patterns from the bottom up, it's a great way to sort of dip your toes into top-down patterns, because I think if you're wanting to level up your skills as an amigurumist, especially if you're a beginner and you haven't tried top-down or bottom-up patterns, it's good to know both because both require different skills. So the top-down, you're going to be working from the body, and then you're going to have to split the body into two parts in order to create the legs. Whereas bottom-up patterns will work from two parts, so you're starting from the legs, and then you actually join those two to make the body. So they're both very different, but all great skills to have in your amigurumi skill set. One tip that I have for this pattern lies in the bow. So when you do make the bow, for me at least, I did have a seam, and I would recommend that you hide the seam underneath this center ribbon, is what she calls it. So anytime that you have seams, always look for things that you can hide it under and just camouflage it. That's a great way to hide visible distractions such as seams. I did find an error in this pattern, and it lies in the bow tie. I found it in rounds 6 through 8. Now, when you get to round 6, you're going to find that her instructions doesn't quite make sense. So my suggestion to you is to follow the color changes for rounds 3 to 5, but use the stitches specified in rounds 2 through 4 when you work rounds 6 through 8. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that helps you out. I think my Satsuki Cat came pretty close to Schenkel's version, and I'm really happy with the way that she came out. I love her. I mean, her nose is a little crooked because I'm not great at embroidery, but it's okay. My nose is a little crooked. And my eyes don't match either. I would highly recommend this pattern. The next 3 amigurumi projects that I have to share with you come from one book, and it is Sweet Crochet Animals by Khuc Cay. Now, before I get into the pattern review, I would like to say a few things about the book because it will apply to all of the 3 patterns. First of all, the book is written in US terminology, which I prefer, but don't worry, Khuc Cay also provides a conversion chart in the beginning of the book where you can just check out what a specific terminology means if you prefer the UK terminology. I absolutely love how Khuc Cay explains her rankings for her patterns. She ranks them between 1 to 3 stars, and the first being for beginners, second for intermediate, and third for advanced amigurumists. But in addition to that, she provides a list of skills required for each of those rankings, which I find is very, very useful and very helpful. Like the last book, I think that skills list is more spot on as far as makers deciding whether or not a pattern is more suitable for them. And you can find this listing or the ranking system in the How to Read My Pattern section of the book. I also love that Khuc Cay provides a visual index of all of the patterns right up front, along with the name and the page numbers, so that you can easily go straight to that pattern without any fuss. I really appreciate that. A few things I would like to mention about the patterns in general, and this will apply to all 3 patterns that I will show you today. Some of the picture references in the patterns are provided in plain text, and others are provided in bold as well as color text. I just want to make you aware of that discrepancy in the pattern, but just know that the numbers that are in parentheses without any labels are referencing photos within the pattern. I think it would have been better had it said picture 3 as opposed to just the plain number 3. I think that would have been more explicit and easier to follow as makers, especially for beginners. One of the things that I love about Khuc Cay's patterns is that when she has instructions repeated throughout multiple rounds of her pattern, she actually specifies the number of rounds. And for me as a maker, I find that very useful because that's how my mind thinks. When I get to a certain point and I just have to repeat around 5 rounds, that's the point where I start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I find that more useful than the round numbers, but that's just me personally. Let me know how you think and how you approach the patterns, because for me, when I have patterns that don't provide that and I have to do the manual counting myself, it's not very helpful, but it is helpful when it is provided. So I really appreciate that, because then it's less work for me as a maker. I don't have to think, I can just make. Now there are times where I use both the round numbers as well as the total number of rounds that I have to do a certain repetition, but I only do that when I'm trying to double check my work. I also love that Khuc Cay tells you whether or not a starting chain counts as a stitch. Sometimes patterns don't tell you whether it counts as a stitch, and you yourself as a maker have to infer that information when you get to the end of the round or the row, and then figure out, okay, did that starting chain count as a stitch or not, based off of the total number of stitches at the end. And again, that's just an additional mental work as a maker. And as a maker, I think we would appreciate if we have to do less thinking and just get to the making. What do you think? All right, I think that's all I have to say about the book. Now let's get into the actual patterns that I made. Now the first pattern I chose was Bury the Cub, and here she is. So super cute. Khuc Cay rates this pattern as a 1-star, which is a beginner pattern, and I absolutely have to agree. What I love about this pattern is the striping. You can practice your jogless color change with patterns such as this one. I also love the ruffles. Also, it helps to hide the neck area if you don't particularly like the look of the neck area for your amigurumi. This is a great way to hide that, and it adds some texture to your final product. For this pattern, Khuc Cay does a little bit of shaping in the snout, but she doesn't specify how to place that shaping on the face. So I just want to say that the shaping stitches are located on the sides, not up and down, but on the sides. So just keep that in mind when you sew on your snout. And when I say shaping, I hope you know what stitches I'm referring to. I did not find any errors in this pattern. It was easy to follow, and I love the way that she turned out. I think my Berry the Cub turned out pretty close to Khuc Cay's version. What do you think? I would highly recommend this pattern. The next project that I chose out of this book is Lulu the Kitten. And here she is. I really love how sweet and demure she looks. If you are liking this video so far, please give us a thumbs up. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you. What I love about this pattern are all the details. I love the foot detail. It's got a little bit of shaping to look like boots, and then boot details with the shoelace and the ruffles here. I think that's so super sweet, and I love that look. And then for her dress area, she's got a finishing detail here which really hides this area here, which can be unsightly, so I really love that detail. And then she's got some ruffling here for her shoulder area, which looks like a collar. I really love that. And then her facial details, so super sweet. And then I love that cherry on the top with the bow on her head, so super cute. I also love the touch of texture that the tool adds to her. I think it adds so much interest. Now, the tool that Khuc Cay uses, as well as the one that I use, does have glitter. But keep in mind, if you're gonna use a tool with glitter, that glitter gets everywhere. You'll be wearing glitter for days. I mean, it'll be on your face, on your hands, on your clothing, in your hair. It gets everywhere. So just be mindful if you choose a tool with glitter. You might want to rethink that if you have little babies around or even pets. For this pattern, I did make a slight modification, and that's just a personal preference of mine, and that is in the legs. So Khuc Cay does have you attach it on the sides, but I prefer to attach my legs in the front because then I can have my amigurumi look and appear as if she's standing or sitting, and because she's a ballerina, you can even pose her to look like she's doing the splits this way. Also, I chose not to use tulle for her head only because I didn't want glitter all over her face. Also, I did not add the button details to the front of her dress because I thought, well, wouldn't it be sweet if I could give it to like a younger child? I mean, it does have tulle, which you don't want to give to babies, but since this doll has an embroidery face, I just figured, okay, if it has an embroidery face, it can go to a younger child, but I will also omit the buttons. But that was just a personal decision on my part. But if you wanted to add the button details, by all means, it makes it even more special. Khuc Cay rates this pattern as 3 stars, and based on her listing of skills required for 3 stars, I absolutely agree. I did not find any errors in this pattern. I found it easy to follow, and I absolutely love the way that she turned out. And I think she looks pretty close to Khuc Cay's version. I would highly recommend this pattern. The next pattern I chose from this book is Chibi the Hamster, and this is how mine's turned out. Here's my Chibi the Hamster. What I found interesting about this pattern was the leg area and how she attached the two. I thought it was a little different than what I'm used to, and I thought it was pretty interesting. And that was Khuc Cay's way of basically telling you to make pigeon toes. I'm not sure if mine's is showing up on camera. Mine's isn't obviously pigeon-toed, but hers is. And the way that she attaches it helps you along with that process to make that look. I also love his bulbous head. You guys know that I love bulbous heads. And look it. it's practically, his whole head is practically the size of the rest of his body. I love how it's pudgy and round, and it looks like he's got possibly got some nuts or seeds stored away in his cheeks, don't you think? I also love the blush color that I chose for his cheeks. I think it pops and adds so much life to his face. Now apparently I must have ran out of steam because I failed to do the hand embroidery detail for his sweater here. It's supposed to be all the way around, but I failed to do it, and it's still fine. He still looks cute and I love him. Khuc Cay rates this pattern as 2 stars, which is an intermediate level, and based on her description of what a 2-level pattern is, I absolutely agree. I did not find any errors, it was easy to follow, and I love the way that he turned out. I think he looks pretty close to Khuc Cay's. I would highly recommend this pattern. My next finished object comes from this book by Emma Varnam, and it is Cute Crocheted Woodland Creatures. This book is written in UK terminology. Now, the book does not provide a conversion chart, but you can easily find one online. Before I get into the pattern itself, I want to discuss some things that I noticed about some of the patterns in this book. Unfortunately, I've got a lot of criticism for this specific pattern that I chose out of this book. I mean, some of my criticism may apply to all of the patterns. I don't know, I haven't really looked throughout the whole entire book, but I'm assuming that the pattern style is pretty consistent throughout. So here we go. So first off, the pattern designer uses 2 different references when she refers to an increase. Oftentimes in patterns, it'll say INC for an increase, but sometimes in UK terminology, you'll see DC INC, which is double crochet increase, but this one has DC2 INC. And for me, that's a little confusing or possibly problematic had it not been specified in the abbreviation section of the book. If you go to that section, it'll specify it's basically an increase. But for me, coming from US terminology and normally just seeing INC, just at a glance, DC to INC, I might mistakenly interpret as 2 increases. So for the moment, as soon as I see it, I stop and I question myself, well, does that mean 2 double crochets together in 1 stitch, or 2 double crochets in the next 2 stitches, meaning 2 increases? So I kind of have to stop for a moment and I get out of the flow, if you know what I mean. When you're working through patterns, sometimes you get into a flow rhythm, but whenever I encounter not the typical pattern specifications or terminology, I kind of have to stop and think, okay, what is the pattern telling me to do? So I'll look in the abbreviations and specify exactly what does the designer mean. And in this particular case, a DC to INC equates to an increase. But in addition to that, sometimes she will say 2 DC into however many stitches. It could be into each stitch left in the round or the row, or it could be in the next 2 or 3 stitches. But I just wish that pattern designers were a little more consistent as far as their terminology throughout. So if you're going to use DC to INC in one section of the pattern, I would prefer to see that throughout if you're going to refer to an increase in that manner. That was just something that I thought could be problematic, especially for beginners. I also noticed that the designer specifies a chain 1 before a UK double crochet into a magic ring, which is unusual, and it goes against I think standard practice. In my opinion, I think and I've been doing many patterns, UK terminology and US terminology patterns. Oftentimes the chain 1 before a UK double crochet or a US single crochet, it's not usually specified. And so I just want to bring this to your attention so that you don't mistakenly make a chain 2 before starting that UK double crochet or that US single crochet, just because it's not standard practice to see in patterns out there, in my experience. One thing that I wish all pattern designers did in their patterns is to specify the total number of stitches at the end of each round or each row. Even though if it might be a repetition from the previous round or row, it's just nice, and I think best practice, to see the total number of stitches at the end of each round or row for that matter. Another thing that I noticed, and this is not to say that the designer is doing something wrong. This is just her way of specifying certain stitches. And there are different designers and they use different terminology and abbreviations, and that seems to be the case here. So Emma Varnam uses the abbreviation TBL for through the back loop, whereas I think most often you may know it better as BLO or back loop only. So just know that Emma uses different terminology than what you may be used to, which was my case when I read through the pattern. One thing I love about what Emma does in her pattern was that she actually explains how the dress is constructed before getting into the pattern. I think that is very helpful for any type of maker, whether you're beginner, intermediate, or advanced. I like to know if a pattern is worked top down or bottom up, just because as you're constructing, if you're having to reorient a piece upside down, right side up, it's nice to know what your end game is and how it's worked from beginning to end. So I think it's very helpful in this particular case. But in any pattern, I think that's highly suggested from a maker's point of view. Hi, this is Editing Gail here. I realized during editing that I failed to make mention of what pattern I'm speaking about. And the pattern that I chose from this book is Matilda Mouse. And here's my version of Matilda Mouse. Okay, let's get back into the original video. To me, I think the dress, how it's constructed or designed, let's just say, looks backwards to me, just because I'm used to the button closure and the opening being in the back. But Emma has it in the front, which I think looks very sweet actually. It has like a little bit of a cleavage showing, kind of a sweet look. But just because I'm not used to it, I modified the pattern so that it's in the back. I thought Emma's approach to the ear placement was pretty unique and interesting. I can't say that I've come across that approach anywhere in any of my other patterns, I don't think, but I thought it pretty interesting and I enjoyed it. I liked it. This pattern is written such that the legs and arms are crocheted in, which is great for those of you who do not enjoy sewing your pieces together. However, if you are a beginner and you don't know how to do that technique, you will have to look online for other resources on how to do that, because the book doesn't get into too much detail on how to do that other than the actual instructions. But if you're more of a visual learner like myself and you need more instructions, then I would recommend that you check out YouTube tutorials on how to do just that. Now, I didn't do the bottom part of the dress, but I did look over the pattern, and I thought that Emma's approach to the decreases in the dress was very interesting. I don't see that very often, but I just thought that I pointed out that it's different, so you as a maker are aware of different idiosyncrasies of how pattern designers write their patterns. I think it's important as a maker to work patterns from different designers, because then you can know that there are differences. You'll know what those differences are and you'll know how to handle them when you come across them. When Emma specifies work 2 rows straight What she means by that is to work the next 2 rows 1 stitch per stitch without any increases or decreases. That's just the pattern designer's way of not having to repeat each round if it's the same instructions. But the verbiage, work 2 rows straight, isn't common in patterns, so I just wanted to clarify that for some of you who may be beginners. As for my modifications, as I mentioned, I did turn the dress around. This in the pattern is supposed to be the front side of the dress, but I did make it the back side. And you can tell the front from the back by looking at where I placed the bow. And then this little touch is my addition. I just thought that it needed a little something, and I like it as a sweet little touch. And then the obvious one is I did use fabric. The original pattern is fully crocheted, but I did modify it so that it's half sewn and half crocheted. And if you're new here, I love to mix media in my creations because it adds a lot of texture and interest. I just like that look. One major modification that I made to this pattern is the body. I did work up the body and the head separately, and when I went to attach the two, I looked at it and I thought to myself, the head is too small for the body. Now again, for those of you who are new to this channel, I have what I call doll dysmorphia, where I prefer my creations' heads to be on the larger size, and to me, I feel it looks right. If it's smaller than that, it just looks wrong. Like, I feel like it needs to be bigger for some reason. And right now, as I'm looking at my Matilda the Mouse in camera, she doesn't look that bad. I don't have that doll dysmorphia. But when I look at her in real life, I do have doll dysmorphia. I feel and think that her head is too small for the size of her body. But this is after I actually made a second body. Now this is a second body and I made it smaller. So when I followed the pattern, original pattern without my modification, the body actually turned out larger. So if you can imagine this body to be larger, that's kind of what you're gonna get. This is a smaller body with my modifications. So just know, if you work the pattern according to how it's written, your body will look larger than this compared to the size of the head. So somewhere in this house, there is a headless mouse. I must have ran out of steam or something because I failed to do the hand embroidery details required for the nose. I'm supposed to embroider a nose there, and then I'm supposed to give her fingers and toes. But I failed to do that, so I'm not sure what was going on. Maybe I was just done with the pattern after making 2 bodies, I don't know. But yeah, I'm still happy with the way that she turned out, even without those details. But if I do have time, I think I might go back and add those details after this video. I love her curly tail. It kind of reminds me of a pigtail just because it's so curly. But I love it. I think it's cute. I also added some blush into her ears. I think it adds some dimension to her ears, and I think that's very sweet. Matilda Mouse here comes with 2 additional accessories, including a headdress and a scarf, but I didn't do either of those, so I cannot speak for those patterns. I did find an error in this pattern, and it's located actually in the dress. In the back portion of the dress, which is actually this panel right here. These are called the left and right panels, but this is the back panel, which is my front. But this is where the error is located, and it's located in rounds 7 and 9. For round 7, it should be 9 double crochets instead of 19 double crochets. And then for round 9, it should read 7 double crochets instead of 17 double crochets. Those corrections will give you the proper number of stitches at the end of the round. In addition, there aren't enough stitches in order to work the 17 or 19 double crochets. With those corrections, you should be able to come up with the proper dress. Even with all of the modifications to the pattern, I think my Matilda the Mouse came pretty close to Emma's version of Matilda, and I was able to replicate the pattern just fine. I just had my personal preferences and I modified it accordingly, and I love the way that mine came out. I did not find a level of difficulty ranking for this pattern, but after having worked it and with all of my critiques of the pattern, I wouldn't recommend it for a beginner or even an advanced beginner, just because the terminology is different and I wouldn't want any beginners to get discouraged or confused and give up crochet or amigurumi altogether. That is something that I do not want. I would probably recommend this pattern to more intermediate to advanced amigurumists just because of those discrepancies or terminology differences that I encountered. Thank you for watching today's video. If you lasted this far, I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos. Let me know what you thought of the video, if it was too brutal, if it's being helpful, because that's exactly what I intend to do. I hope to be more helpful than hurtful, and my intention with this whole feedback thing is to help other makers like myself, and I'm giving you my maker's point of view. I don't design patterns, but I do have my preferences on how I'd like them to be written, and that's what I'm sharing with you in this video. My preferences, what I like to see as a pattern maker. As makers, for me, at least I speak for myself, let me know if I'm speaking for you as well or if you agree, but I like it when patterns are easy to follow, easy to replicate, error-free, and that it encourages workflow and not having to stop me and get out of the flow of things. If I can work a pattern easily without much thought, without much effort on my part, and everything's there that I need, that's the perfect pattern. And if I'm able to replicate it according to how the pattern maker intended it to be, then perfect. They've achieved exactly the whole purpose of a pattern. To me, the whole purpose of a pattern is so that someone else can replicate what the designer did with success and without much frustration. Without any frustration, to be honest. So that is what my intention is. If I do work a pattern and I do encounter frustration, I share it with you from a maker's point of view so that you may know ahead of time what you're up against if you were to work a pattern. But thank you so much for listening to me, whether you took this as a rant video or what. But I just really want to be honest with my reviews on this channel, and I hope it's more helpful than hurtful. Let me know down below in the comments. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one, I hope. Bye-bye. Now, I made this last year, and she was made with my, I'm gonna call it the Miko method, because in one of my previous podcasts, I explained that I had learned something from my daughter who is a beginner amigurumist. And I noticed, I will try to link that video, but in that video, I'm basically explaining that Miko makes her amigurumis so soft and squishy that I wanted to emulate that. Mine's are not soft and squishy. I have a very tight tension and I stuff my amigurumi firmly. So it's pretty hefty. My amigurumis are pretty beefy and hefty. Not so much where it stretches out the fabric and you can start seeing the stitches, but that's just how it is. That's how I typically make my amigurumi. But when I picked up her amigurumi and it was soft and squishy, I was like, wait, what? What are you doing that I'm not doing? Because I am loving the way that your amigurumi is feeling, and she is using the same yarn as I am. Granted, it's not the same hook size. I do give her a larger hook size than what I work because I want her to get used to working stitches without having to worry about tension so much. So I was like, let me do an experimentation. And I ended up using a larger hook size with my typical 4-weight acrylic yarn, which is Hobby Lobby's I Love This yarn. And I made an amigurumi with the intention of having a looser tension. So I was more relaxed, I was in a zen mode, and I mentally had to tell myself looser tension and bigger hook will naturally give me a looser tension. And then on top of that, I also tried stuffing lighter, not as firmly as I normally do. I mean, it's firm, but not my extra firm. Because usually I'll stuff and then I'll stuff even more. But this time I stuffed firmly and I didn't do the more part. I just did the single stuffing firmly and that was it. I called it done. So this is what she came out to be, and she is super soft. My amigurumi normally does not turn out this way. I mean, you could probably squeeze it like, and that's it. That's as much squeezing as you can do. But this one, look at that. And it pops out. I mean, if I do it long enough, or if I smash her long enough, maybe she won't pop back out. But yeah, I really love this Miko method that I discovered by my beginner amigurumist daughter. So I really love that I modified that. So whenever I have hand issues and I don't want to deal with pain, I will probably do my Miko method and size up and just release my tension to a looser one. Albeit there is a caveat to this method. For me, I do notice when I do size up and I do a looser tension, I do have a tendency to see my stuffing a little more. I don't think I can say that for my normal amigurumi. I don't usually see my stuffing, but I can when I use my Miko method. And that's something that you want to try and avoid as much as possible. But for me, I'm like, it's okay. I'm going to compromise that part and just have comfort in my hands instead. So I'm okay. So if I'm not so concerned about seeing my stuffing, or if it's, invisible enough, I'm happy. And for this one, it's invisible enough. I don't see it too much. There are some of my projects where I do the Miko method and you can definitely see the stuffing. It's really obvious, but this one's not as much. It's still pretty good, I think.